Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty fascinating experiment that takes a chaotic live political debate and basically turns it into the ultimate fact-checking game show. Honestly, if you've ever watched a political argument and thought, man, I wish someone would just pause the room and look up the actual data, well, you are going to absolutely love this breakdown.
Okay, the rules of this debate format are incredibly simple, but they raise the stakes immensely. Basically, the debaters are heavily penalized for falsehoods and rewarded for catching them in real time. If the opposing side says something false, you hit a buzzer, and independent fact-checkers verify it live. If you're right, your team gets a point. But if your challenge is wrong, the other team gets the point. Knowing that you can't just hide behind vague rhetoric completely shifts the psychology of the room. It literally forces everyone to speak with absolute precision.
All right, let's jump in. Round 1, affordability and the economy.
Traditionally, this is one of the most hotly contested areas in any political arena, right? Our first major duel centered on a tightly focused question: whose policies are better for quality of life and affordability? Instantly, this sparked a really heated back and forth between the progressive and conservative teams about healthcare costs, insurance premiums, and taxes.
So, during the healthcare clash, the conservative team pushed a very specific claim regarding the Affordable Care Act and nationalized healthcare. A conservative debater emphatically stated that public investment is fundamentally more expensive than the free market when it comes to overall national coverage. Because it was such a sweeping, broad statement, the liberals immediately hit the fact-check buzzer to test it out.
And buzzer! The judges stepped in and definitively proved the claim false. The fact-checkers pulled the exact data, showing that public program administrative costs are actually lower. They run at about 2%, whereas private insurance administrative costs are more expensive. So, the conservatives lost that exchange, mainly because they relied on a traditional political talking point rather than the verified statistical reality.
But hey, the liberals weren't immune to stumbling into the exact same trap. Often the desire for a quick gotcha moment leads debaters to inflate their numbers. Later in the round, the progressive team fired back with their own bold economic claim regarding Republican tax policies. A liberal debater stated with a lot of confidence that 81% of the 2017 corporate tax cuts went directly to stock buybacks. Naturally, the conservatives immediately hit their buzzer. Now notice the actual data here. It proves the liberal claim false and ends up costing them a penalty point. The fact-checkers revealed that, yes, while a large portion did go to stock buybacks, the research puts the actual number closer to 40 to 50%, not 81%. This highlights a major rhetorical trap. An exaggeration, even if you're trying to make a valid broader point about tax policy, gets you heavily penalized in this format.
So, looking at the board, despite that major stumble on the tax data, the liberals managed to take a slight lead. Both sides learned very quickly during this first round that throwing out unverified percentages in the heat of the moment is just an incredibly dangerous game. Let's move on to round 2, bigotry and discrimination.
Now, this is the kind of topic where political debates usually go completely off the rails into shouting matches, right? But the fact-check buzzer kept everyone anchored to demonstrable reality. As the debate waded into highly charged social issues, the next prompt dropped. Which party is more bigoted and discriminatory? As you might imagine, this immediately drew both teams into intense arguments about identity, systemic prejudice, and free speech.
It was honestly fascinating to see the divergence here. Both teams approached this topic from entirely different strategic angles. The liberal argument focused heavily on legislative actions restricting transgender rights. The conservative argument, on the other hand, focused on the culture war, specifically pointing to leftists online supporting political violence against conservative figures. This sharp contrast led to a flurry of buzzer presses as both sides looked for factual weaknesses to exploit.
So the liberals made a highly specific historical claim regarding early executive orders. They stated verbatim that the Trump administration targeted trans people on day one of taking office. Now, whenever you use a phrase like day one, you are offering a highly specific, measurable metric for fact-checkers to verify. It's risky. But the fact-checkers verified this claim based on documented executive branch actions. It was rated true. The administration did make transgender policy a prominent early priority, signing an order on day one to restore biological truth and ordering the Department of Justice to target what they called radical gender ideology. This earned the liberals a hard-fought point for absolute historical accuracy.
Later in the round, the conversation shifted to online rhetoric. When conservatives argued about hateful online speech celebrating the death of a political figure,
a liberal debater hit the buzzer to define constitutional protections. They claimed, quite broadly, that freedom of speech fundamentally means protecting freedom of speech that you hate.
And leaning on the actual legal definition of free speech secured another point for the liberals. The fact-checkers confirmed that the First Amendment specifically protects freedom of speech from government restriction, which expressly includes the right to express opposing or hateful views. This really highlights a great debate strategy. Leaning on strict legal definitions is often much safer and much more verifiable than relying purely on moral posturing.
So as round 2 closes out, the liberals extend their lead to 7-3. They achieve this by carefully utilizing the fact-check buzzer to verify those strict constitutional definitions and documented historical timelines.
Moving right along, round 3, protecting constitutional rights.
Let's see how the teams navigated this legal landscape. The debaters clashed heavily over which constitutional amendments are most actively threatened today. The conservative focus zoned in on the Second Amendment and the 14th Amendment regarding the rights of the unborn. Meanwhile, the liberal focus shifted to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, allegedly violating the Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure.
During a super tense exchange regarding abortion and constitutional protections, a liberal debater made a sweeping, absolute statement regarding conservative legislative records. They confidently declared that Republicans have done nothing to legally protect fetuses.
And this right here is exactly why using absolutes in politics is just so dangerous. Words like nothing or always are massive rhetorical vulnerabilities. This easily debunked claim cost them dearly. The verdict was false. There is a massive, well-documented body of evidence of Republican policymakers acting to legally protect fetuses in multiple states. Claiming they have done literally nothing is a statistical and historical impossibility, and it essentially guarantees a penalty in a fact-check debate.
Okay, the tension is high. We've made it to round 4, the sudden death finale.
For this final round, teams wagered their accumulated points on a single, uninterrupted debate. The first person to hit the buzzer stops the debate and triggers the final fact check. If they're right, they win the wager. If they're wrong, the other team takes it all. The topic chosen was comparing the presidential records of Joe Biden and Donald Trump. In a fierce debate over foreign policy and military degradation, a conservative debater made a highly specific statistical claim. He stated that Iran's missile stockpile has decreased by more than 50% since the start of the war. The liberals instantly slammed the buzzer.
And that slight exaggeration on just a single word completely tanked the conservative team's all-or-nothing wager. The fact-checkers revealed the verdict was false. Classified intel reports state the stockpile decreased by, at best, 50%, with some estimates putting it much, much lower. By specifically claiming it was more than 50%, the conservative debater lost the challenge. When millions of details are available at our fingertips, precision is absolutely everything.
Because of that massive sudden death wager, the liberals absolutely ran away with the game, with a final score of 16-3. But as we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a truly provocative thought. Look at how heavily both sides relied on exaggerations, broad generalizations, and skewed statistics right up until the buzzer forced them into reality. So, does real-time fact-checking actually change how we debate, or does it just change how we keep score? If we held all politicians to strict, instant accountability, would it fundamentally change our political landscape? It definitely makes you wonder how different our nightly news would look with a live fact-check buzzer. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep seeking out the facts.